I didn't get the memo. Steve, I didn't get them here.
Either did I. Or Steve, if I didn't read the memo.
I still didn't get a personalized memo. Well, this is kind of beachy. I would wear this to the colder part of the beach day.
This is dress up. This is after the beach going out to dinner. Okay?
Yeah, this is Frisco Beach. You guys are like Hawaii. Something new for your slideshow. You have to. You have to. Oh my God. Yeah, I'm
Yeah, we could
put it here.
Yeah, it seems like it might be a little loose on your shirt. It's a little loose. We'd have to swap that out. Yeah, as long as that's a little thicker, that should be. We might be able to get you another clip.
Do you guys have a flash drive?
I do upstairs. Yeah. Why don't you check it out? Not connecting your phone either.
You know, it's like 25 megabytes. How long? It's like, I mean, I've got it. It says it's okay. It's sent. Exactly. Perfect. I just didn't know if it was going to hang up or if it was going to send. Everyone can see your email, Damian. Do you really keep it that clean? Is that really your email?
Yeah.
Isn't it really your email?
Yeah. Yes, I keep it that clean. I'm a bit of a geek.
Do you have folders? Or do you just delete?
I have Basecamp, I do Blue.
Are you connected to Wi-Fi?
Yeah. Check. 1 2 1 2.
Mine is sent, so it's somewhere between you and I.
I started recording now because I'm afraid.
Hi, Michael.
How's it going? I heard you have a new car. Damian said you made it up.
It's a fun little toy.
And it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. We took Loveland Pass and then Shadow Mountain.
Freaking awesome.
Yeah, it was nice.
Awesome.
We went around a corner and I thought, oh, we're in a ditch.
But you didn't go into the ditch because it's not.
It's so low.
That's like the whole
it's just a
purpose
little
of it.
roadster, so it just whips around.
Amazing.
Did you send it to the right Damian?
Yeah. I've sent an email to it. It's in my outbox and it's sent. So it's 25 megabytes. So it's probably just waiting to get to you.
What are you using? Your phone as a hotspot?
Yeah, because I couldn't get on the hotel Wi-Fi.
Gosh, guys, come on.
That's IT. We're AV.
There's there is an account that you can hook onto. It's Beaver Run Guest. Did you try that one?
We tried to get him on the meeting and then it kind of just started.
The meeting voucher.
Well, it might be that you're running this.
Mine's already through my phone.
Okay, yeah, I got him on the IT network just to try it. Yeah, so
Fancy.
yeah, and
Okay.
anything past the typing in the voucher is where my IT
I know.
knowledge stops.
Same.
Yeah, on site now.
I'm gonna go.
I can get you that flash drive too.
Somebody here certainly has a flash drive.
I got one up in the office right now.
We can start a little bit late because parking is.
Well, yeah, new people are still coming in.
Yeah.
So I'm not. Or we can just plug my computer in, but it's coming to you. It's on its way.
I say that, but it's not here.
Let me grab that flash drive. Just
Did you
back up?
refresh your inbox?
Oh, I've been sitting here doing nothing.
Send receive?
Well, the other part is you have to measure do they really work?
The main title was
These are.
yeah. You think about that first. You think about that first.
Oh, yeah. Pretty good. Uh-oh.
What are you doing in my seat?
Well, I don't know where the video went per se. Oh, down here. There we go. Let's see this.
Yeah. And I think it share the screen
Oh, okay.
But what we're working on is presentation.
Okay.
I just sent it again, Damian, on a super fast. Now I'm connected to the.
Now are you actually doing something?
Well, I was doing it before.
It was? I didn't get it. Let me go look at my email and see if it's got.
It still takes a little while to send because it's a big. It's got a lot of.
so big. It's got like 3
It's
files.
got a lot of photos of you, and I said I worked on it a lot this morning. You can't mess with it.
The whole point of him doing the presentation so he can make fun of me. That's
Yes.
literally.
That's exactly it.
That's why I would like to have control of the
Well,
PowerPoint.
I got some that is just a fucking stuff. Look at my feet. So I have 2 pairs of shoes that are almost identical. And I was in such a hurry when I grabbed 2 right feet. So I go to this is a right foot shoe on my left foot. I didn't have anything else. I went to throw my shoes on a little bit ago, and I was like, what the hell's going on? I'm like,
floppies.
It's still not going through?
it's going.
Well, we can try this. If you want to flip this in and try.
There's 2 of them out there.
We'll get some way.
All right, let me get on. So there was
Are we flashing?
I've got that too. That just
You keep saying that, but.
No, it's a soft shoe. It's totally soft. You spit on it.
I would never notice if you didn't just tell me.
I
So
know.
you're doing
Well, I
fine.
told him, so it'll be common knowledge.
Cool. Let's try and load this up.
As soon as you plug that in, it'll pop up in the email.
Here, you gotta go this side. Do this one.
Let's
Okay.
just unplug the camera. Guess we just unplug this too.
Yeah, sure.
See if
So,
we get there.
here I am.
Sweet.
Excuse me real quick. That's the clicker. I told him, even though it's his computer, I control the clicker.
Well, she's gonna be your clicker, because I'm having USB ports. Oh, you will when you pull out the flash drive.
Oh, is that what it was? Oh, okay.
There it is. Right at the bottom. D-Rays.
Top one, Potpourri Cox. Open. Oh, yeah, you probably want to
We want
drag
to
it.
drag it so it's on there.
It changes stuff, so I can't tell what's what.
That looks better. Okay. So you should be able to eject that flash drive now. It looks like it copied over and everything's fine. Thank you.
Excuse me.
So again, we'll just be in the room when you start to make sure that it's on.
As long as I can see, I need to be able to see you guys to make sure they're right. So by clicker, you mean setting the next button on there.
Yeah, thank you guys for sitting up front.
Yeah, we know what's about to happen.
I feel like a leper up here sometimes.
Minimize.
I thought of you. Hide non-video participants in your own studio. I didn't know about the Hawaiian. So if you go into the Zoom. And then if you click up here in the corner under view, sorry, actually click on, yeah, it should pick up your voice. So if you hover over my name or over my picture, it should give that right there and then hide non-video. Perfect.
So here is this. Okay, for the screen and everything else.
Yep.
And then we got a presentation. It just shows you.
Yep.
Okay.
Figure out.
What if we did this?
This delay is no longer my technical issue. Oh, recording it on.
We're trying to share the screen.
You guys having a good summer? It'll be fun. I'm not. Right.
I would give like 2 stars. The problem is, say your last one time was here next time. So let's just,
Minimize this, the whole side.
Yeah, just explain that to me there.
So.
So you're trying to do that shared screen so everyone can see what you record.
Trying to
or-
discriminate
This
against.
is not going to record, it's just the video. But you want us to be able to record the slides?
Do they have the ability to fill out the conduct question?
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, we're good.
cool. And this microphone too, I just left it on, so all you have to do is.
But they're making misrepresentations about.
Q&A or else.
You need to make sure in the back that you can hear.
And I've got Sam back
Are
there
they
as well, so I'm
licensed?
gonna adjust the volume.
Hers is more Zoom. I want to make sure that
Okay, right.
we don't have PM licensing anymore in the state. Well, they don't have it. The program was abolished, so it could be licensed as a broker. And that would, I think, there could be some quiet jurisdiction. They're ready to go. Are they going to introduce us, or do we just go?
Do you have to do something? I don't want him to introduce me.
I would have so many flip-flops. I'm so like, I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in myself. There's a secret among the board of directors.
Well, Dana threw me because she offered me this disco jacket. I was like, maybe it's a disco theme, but.
Yeah.
No, that's right. I was under impressed with Scott.
Nice, Trisha. You can tell him. That was authoritative. Hey, everybody, look at Deshaun. Do you have to buy those socks if you actually own them?
I'll just.
Okay. Are you sure you don't own them?
I do now. Which is great. Hey, everybody. You ready to get started here?
For those of you who did not get the memo about the attire today, it's okay. We'll give you a hall pass. But next time, gentlemen, we better see something a little different from you. Yeah, a little bit more formal is what we're going for.
I actually may do a quick behind the screen change real quick. I brought a swimsuit for later, so.
Do you have your thing on? Turn your thing on. Because you might need to change your footwear just out of principle.
I brought two right shoes. They're substantially identical shoes, but I just grabbed the two rights instead of a right and a left. And they're soft, supple leather. This audio is really giving a lot of feedback. Is that just because there's too many microphones up here? All right, I'll shut up.
Am I back on? All right, so thanks so much for coming to our 2022 SAR Industry Party. Right after this, in the Colorado ballroom upstairs, we're going to be doing the affiliate trade show and the lunch. Every affiliate will be handing out a $50 gift card, so reason to go, right? After that, we'll be doing a complimentary happy hour, so I know that everybody will stick around for that for sure. And with that, we're going to do a dunk tank. So I guess you guys are going to join in that, right? Or are you going to try to take off?
He's going to wear his two right shoes. I've got to stay for that.
Yeah.
Do we have a choice? Do we have a choice?
You don't. Okay. I don't know why I said that. So, you know, with this industry party, we really couldn't do this without our affiliates. And so as you walk up the stairs going to the trade show, Summit Mountain Rentals is there, and then our title sponsor. So make sure and stop in and say hello to them. This wouldn't be possible without them, especially my wardrobe. Actually, they had nothing to do with that. So as of right now, we're gonna hand out a gift card. And so, oh, it's in my jacket. So pretty much we're gonna run through the sign up sheet and see who the lucky winner is for a cool $500. I know, right? That's right, correct? I didn't misread that, like 50, okay.
$500. Wow.
And the winner is Daniel Connor.
That's the present to win. Oh, there she is.
Come on down. Sorry, I'm sorry. We got to take a picture. Sorry. Sorry, Danielle. I hate it whenever people butcher my name as well. And it's so easy. Yeah, right? So just want to thank you guys too for joining us for Legal Potpourri. To be honest with you, this is one of the best CE classes I've ever been a part of, especially whenever Scott Cox and Damian Peterson are running the show. Just a ton of insight into current events. So to get started, Damian Cox has practiced in the real estate industry since 1995. In addition to sitting on the CREC forums and education committee, he has served on multiple CREC task force, worked closely with the Attorney General's office in drafting new legislation. He represents over 20 brokerage firms with over 2,000 real estate brokers across Colorado. Damian teaches for realtor associations across Colorado and has served as guest lecturer at DU Law. Scott Peterson, as general counsel for the Colorado Association of Realtors since 2015. Scott is responsible for advising the CAR Board of Directors, CAR Leadership Council, and the CAR CEO on legal matters related to the association's businesses. In addition, he provides legal support and education directly to CAR's members and the state's Realtor Association through the CAR Legal Hotline and education events. If you haven't used the hotline, it's a great resource. And I suggest trying to keep these guys on the phone as long as you can. But in all seriousness, it is an absolute fantastic resource for all of us brokers in the state. Finally, Scott has advocated for the association and realtors' interest in legal matters involving third parties such as vendors, contractors, and state regulator agencies. Scott is admitted to practice law in both California and Colorado, and he is also licensed real estate broker in Colorado and has been a realtor for more than 20 years. I had no idea. Yeah. If you like this session with Scott and Damian, Scott will be back and he'll be teaching a class on November 16th, the 10 legal things. You can sign up on our dashboard.
It won't be as good though, because I won't be there.
Well said. All right. It's on to you guys.
Cool. Hopefully that's much better balance. Perfect. Hi, guys. Good morning. Maybe not such good. I'm getting some feedback there. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for inviting us up here to the hottest ticket in Summit County for 2022, the industry party. I was not told about the Hawaiian theme, but I have a solution. And as soon as Damian starts yabbing at some point for an extended period of time, I'm going to slip out and get at least halfway Hawaiian for everybody. Because I literally do have two right shoes on, but I also have a pair of flip-flops that'll certainly help that little problem that I'm having.
I think you should go in the dunk tank like that.
Well, I might. I look like a clown. At least it's not two left feet. Go ahead and click here for us, Trish. Welcome to Potpourri. It's not even clicking.
Well, I don't have a clicker.
It's Damian's computer.
Yeah. Is this what you did?
No. This is a great way to start a class. It's really funny if you give me a second to get here. Potpourri. Isn't that beautiful? That's the potpourri.
If you're your grandma.
Yeah, well, so we got Colorado potpourri. Go ahead and click again there. Same idea. You guys consider it for whatever you want.
We are in the mountains.
We are in the mountains. All right, one more click. Oh boy. God. Look at this. This is Damian. He's just deciding on which one of those two nail colors. It's either, it looks like orange or like a mango color and like a bright red. Well, you'll have to wait till the end to find out. But Damian recently had nail day. That was not me who took the photograph. We did not do that together, just FYI. Go ahead and click again. All right, now we're here to the serious stuff you guys have been just dripping and waiting to get to, huh? So the concept of potpourri, who's seen potpourri before? Cool, most of you guys. Okay, so it's the same concept. This is meant to be an interactive, kind of engaging discussion, dialogue. It all comes down really anything your heart's desire to talk about, but there's a lot of topics. We can fill, I don't know, 2.5, 3 hours if we needed to, if you guys just want us to talk, but I'm really hopeful that you guys will point us in the right direction of where you'd like us to be talking rather than have us, kind of drive you. And so somebody throw something out up on the screen or any place else. Which one of those things you want to hear about? And don't say, I put this in as kind of a joke. That was just kind of a joke.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to talk, but let's not lead with that because we'll end with that as well, I'm sure.
I was just going to ask if they've heard that there's something going on with short-term rental licenses. Does anybody?
That was just, it was a little bit of joke. I'm not saying we can't talk about it, but I don't want to dwell on it. So let's start with something other than that.
Oh, goody.
Clear cooperation, the other one that gets the barn burning.
Yeah.
Well, so I'll kind of kick this one off because I'm probably the most familiar with it. But and so obviously the clear cooperation policy that was promulgated by NAR in, I think it was May of 2019 was when they kicked that off. Couldn't really have come at a worse time in a lot of ways because our market got really, really tight and everybody got really uptight about the availability of information and a lot of confusion related to that. But what this is referring to is having to do a little bit with that antitrust stuff above. There were 2 lawsuits that were filed in California, in federal district court in California, shortly after the policy was implemented, summer of 2019. And they were filed by 2 different broker networks, broker guilds. And these were essentially like top producer network or whatever you want to call them. And it was a group
a kind of forum of some of the top producers in multiple offices that would get together weekly or monthly or quarterly or whatever and kind of trade listings among each other, right? Well, obviously the clear cooperation policy made that all go away, right? Because those are just essentially pocket listings for some of these top producers. And so it kind of obliterated these two broker networks. The broker networks in California sued NAR and said, this is collusionary, this is antitrust. Your policy for clear cooperation is based in antitrust, and it doesn't work. Can't do it. And pretty quickly after those lawsuits were filed in California, both of them were dismissed by the California respective two federal district courts in California that had looked at them, dismissed the lawsuits. And so I've been saying for the last couple of years that the clear cooperation policy has really been affirmed by a pretty difficult kind of court out in California when it comes to collusionary kind of behavior, meaning that for all intents and purposes, the clear cooperation policy is here to stay. It's not going to probably go anywhere. Well, about 3 months ago, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in California, very progressive circuit court, obviously, they overturned the lower court's decision in one of those matters. And so now that lawsuit is back in the mix. And so we'll see what happens. It's not anything that's going to change overnight with clear cooperation, but there is now a reasonable chance that there could be some problems with the NAR MLS clear cooperation policy. Doesn't mean you guys can start now doing pocket listings and, you know, not posting your stuff and advertising, or not listing within the MLS policy of one business day after any public marketing, but it's something to keep an eye on, because I was actually very surprised when that lawsuit came back, and it did just recently. So now it's going to go back to the district court and kind of litigate through the process. So keep an eye on that one going forward. Kind of a little bit of a surprise. So anything on clear cooperation you want to say?
No, I still like it.
You see, Damian likes it. I should be the one, you know, as a car attorney, like saying how much I love clear cooperation. My problem is it's meant to address bad actors in the marketplace, right? And there were a lot of bad actors, a lot of people who would put up a for sale sign for 6 weeks, you know, looking to kind of solicit sign calls and such. And that doesn't perpetuate our industry in any way, shape, or form. But there's also a lot of situations where sellers want some other marketing method, or maybe they don't want to market, you know, on the MLS. They want to have more of a limited marketing situation. I get calls from some of the super luxury, I would say, resort markets like Telluride and Aspen for very high profile, you know, business executives, famous, you know, actors, actresses, athletes, this sort of thing. And they legitimately don't want to participate in the MLS. And so these brokers, listing brokers will call and say, what can I do? And my answer honestly is nothing. There is just no flexibility for the rule, and it makes it difficult in those ways, I think. But I like Damian's point about why there's a lot of good to the policy. And I agree with what go ahead and let you talk about that as well.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before up here, I know, but you know, I like the policy because to me, when we started the MLS, when the brokers started the MLS years and years and years ago, the whole purpose was to share information, was to share listings. And the minute that we got away from clear cooperation, which was the whole intent and purpose of the MLS, we got into the situation where buyer brokers became less valuable. Sellers might think, wait a minute, you know, might get taken advantage of by somebody because they're trying to double end a deal instead of looking out for their best interests of their clients. And so I think it's a protection of your industry. I do agree that, you know, Tom Cruise may not want everybody going through his home. But at the same time, the majority of people, this is really something that is good for your industry because it makes buyer brokers valuable. It makes the sellers make sure that they're getting full price for their properties. It's just, to me, the good outweighs the bad. So that's my opinion on it.
Any other questions, issues on that? If not, we can move to another topic. Hit us, somebody.
Oh, hotline calls.
Times are changing.
Times are changing. You got to tell them about how we started this year with this potpourri.
Yeah, literally potpourri and early in the first quarter of 2022, when Damian and I would do it or do it individually, one of the big issues was, you know, insane market conditions and clauses, talk a lot about appraisal gap clauses and escalation gap clauses and everything else. And, you know, March, April, certainly by May hit, and everything changed with all those discussions, like pretty dramatically overnight. I know you guys are seeing it in a very significant sense. And so as a result of that, the hotline calls the composition of those changed dramatically. And I'll just start, first of all, I about fell out of my chair when I got my first call. And I literally remember like as sitting there hearing it. And it was a question about when, where, and how to use the Foreclosure Protection Act contract. I was like, I haven't had a foreclosure question in about 3 years
or 10.
It's been a long, long time since we've had any foreclosure questions. From the point of that call, I'm probably clipping along at 3 or 4 a month of those calls. Now, remember, and Damian had mentioned that we were talking yesterday and you had short sale, which really surprises me.
We have title companies that, I have a school that they want classes, and the biggest one they want right now is a class on short sales. Now, I don't know how or why, or maybe brokers are just trying to be preemptive, because it seems like there's a lot of equity in properties with appraisal gap guarantees, even HELOCs and things build in equity and that kind of thing when they take money out. But people are looking at short sales now. They're looking at getting trained up on short sales because they're concerned that's where the market could go, which is a little different than March when we had to worry about appraisal gap guarantees, escalation clauses, and multiple offers.
Yeah, so I think, and remember, foreclosure is to me kind of a trailing indicator in the sense of people's financial condition, right? Because they've started to miss some mortgage payments. The bank's starting to crack down. There's a lot of people that had a lot of foreclosure protection during COVID, a lot of additional COVID resources and money and, kind of flexibility there. And so that drying up in connection with, some of the financial uncertainty, I think is what's leading to these kinds of questions. And so to me, that's a little bit of a frightening indicator. Short sales would really be very frightening, obviously, but I mean, everybody's had such appreciation over the last several years, and our underwriting criteria has been so strict enough that we haven't had some of the obnoxious sort of leveraged into residential properties that we had before the mortgage crisis. So I think hopefully that doesn't occur. And anybody who wrote an appraisal gap contract, obviously, that money, that they've brought that additional money into the purchase. And so the short sale, even if the values fall, won't have the same effect it could have from years ago.
Now, the one thing I will say about the appraisal gap guarantees, which is something that I think Scott and I have both been talking about, is that my concern is that when somebody has to sell and they realize the appraisal gap that they put in, they can't get back anymore, who are they going to blame? I'm sure, and it's their own fault as far as I'm concerned. They made that decision. I'm sure most of you advised them. Well, the people in this room, I'm sure, advised their clients about it. I'm sure there's others that didn't, but you can still see where they get amnesia and all of a sudden they forget that you told them that this was a possibility, and then that's who they look to try and recoup that money. So they may not be short sales, but we could see something along those lines too as people have to move.
Another hotline question that's been coming up a lot recently is price reductions. What do I need to do to have a price reduction? Do an amend extend to the broker or to the listing agreement, obviously, to amend that and reduce prices. I hadn't had price reduction questions in many, many, many years.
I got to tell you, so there were some new brokers that came into an office, and one of my more seasoned brokers says, Damian, I realized we have to talk about negotiations again. I said, what do you mean? And they said, these new brokers come in and they said, well, why didn't you just offer at or below the listing price? And they said, you can do that? Because the market we've seen for the last 2 years, you did not offer below the listing price. So I mean, it's like, okay, maybe we need to train that. This is just something you can go lower. It's okay. You don't always have to go higher, but it is changing.
Yeah. Another one I've had that you guys will love, or some of you will love, that I've had a handful of them over the last several months, and that is buyer broker incentives, realtor incentives. How do we structure, a commission spiff or extra commission to a buyer broker who can bring a buyer and close a deal within a certain number of days or by a certain date? Haven't seen that in a lot of years either. That's kind of a good question to be getting, I guess, for buyer brokers. They like hearing that.
I've been seeing it for builders, so you guys remember back when the market was crazy, you had builders that were, well, if you don't come in and sign documents and bring your buyer in person, and you don't make sure that you sign this one document or you do this, they were looking for any way they could to cut the broker out of the transaction. Now they're like, so how would you guys like to come here? We'll have a party for you. We'll put you in a raffle. We'll give away a big screen TV. I mean, it's amazing. Their attitude has completely changed. But it's funny because brokers have long memories. And so the guys that cut the brokers' throats the most, I think, will probably suffer the most consequences in this shift in market. It did last time. Melody Holmes did not survive. So anyways, I digress.
No, but don't
forget your fiduciary to your buyer as you're dealing with builders who you may have a previous hatred for how they've treated you. I'm going to come back to that one because that may open a can of worms with this crowd. Moving brokerage firms is another one I'm getting a lot of. Brokers that are bouncing around to another brokerage firm. I think that's indicative of people going like, you know, things are getting a little flat. What can I do to shake things up? How can I, you know, and so the questions related to how do I move my listings? You know, what do I need to do to, you know, get my license moved over? Particularly it's the question I get is mostly related to moving your listings. And I'll just point out, you know, or what I end up having to remind a lot of people who believe otherwise, the brokerage relation or the brokerage contract is with the brokerage firm and the consumer, not the individual broker and the consumer, despite the fact that you guys are the ones signing the listing agreements and so on and so forth. That removal or moving that relationship has to be done through the brokerage firm and not just independently through the broker.
Yeah, one other thing I'll point out, and we're going to talk about a little bit more later, is about the new position statements. But there was a position statement that was literally rewritten completely that talks about transferring listings or transferring brokerage firms, what it looks like, what permissions you need from your client. You know, for years, everybody's thought you change it in the MLS and that's the end of it, but there's more to it. There's consents, there's making sure the brokerage firm agrees to it. And so if you're in that position, look at that position statement.
Another big area of hotline calls that I'm getting more of that I think is reflective of the market is earnest money disputes, basically just sellers being jerks. I was going to use a different word, but
I was going to say,
it's a big crowd. I'll refrain.
PG.
Sellers being jerks, and just basically because, you know, they get under contract and over the market has changed so rapidly and they've seen such a flattening so quickly that it's been sellers who sign a contract and, you know, a month later they're getting a termination for something. And the buyer has every right to terminate, but the seller, you know, is just being a jerk. They just don't want to sign the earnest money release because now they're going, wait a second, I got to go back out to this market that's changed over the last several weeks or months, and I don't want to do that. Now, it doesn't matter. They still have to do that. And I'll let you can point out the changes to the contract this year that are helpful in 4.3.
4.3. Which one's 4.3?
4.3.2.1, the earnest money.
Oh, yeah. So one of the, I'm like,
point
I
1 and 2.
forgot. What did I draft? So one of the things that the sellers have, or the tools that you have as a broker, and I'll tell you, it didn't change anything in the contract. Okay, literally it did not change a thing. But there's now a provision in there that says what happens if the buyer doesn't give the earnest money to the seller because the buyer's in default? What happens if the seller doesn't give the money back if the buyer terminated properly? And it's very helpful to point out to a seller that, hey, you do this, you know, you take some risk because if you don't return it within 3 days, it means that the buyer could be entitled to attorney fees, could be entitled to costs, could get their earnest money back anyways. It's a nice provision to point out that there's some pain if they do that. But, you know, I mean, you get where the sellers are coming from. I mean, our market has changed so much. If they have to go back on the market, all of a sudden, they're not going to get the same offers they were getting before. And that's what's concerning them. So a lot of this is, you know, listing brokers, first of all, you better have that conversation with your seller and warn them that just because we're under contract doesn't mean this buyer is going to be able to perform all the way through. They might have lending problems. They might come up with stuff on inspection. There might be issues with title. We don't know. But just to make sure you set that expectation that it's not a done deal, because I think that's a lot of the problem we're having is sellers are used to that you put it under contract, you're kind of done. That's not the market anymore. Buyers have more bargaining power and they can ask for more things when they start looking at inspection.
All right, a couple more. This one's kind of a heartbreaking one, honestly, but I'm getting a lot of calls from buyer brokers whose buyers, particularly in kind of more large scale spec new construction stuff, like think, you know, Green Valley Ranch, you know, in Denver or whatever, big speculative Highlands Ranch, kind of new construction areas. They went under contract 12, 15, 18 months ago on new construction. And as they performed their costs, they were looking at interest rates that were 2.5%, 3%. And now that they're getting to a point of closing, they're looking at a very different interest rate profile and they're not able to perform or not willing to perform. And they're in most of these builder contracts, they don't have a lot of remedy in that case. And it's what's so maddening about it is many of them are saying, we were supposed to close, you know, February 15th. And the damn builder, because of their, you know, construction delays or COVID delays or supply chain delays or whatever, were the ones who pushed us along, which they had a right to do through the contract. But now they have no recourse when it comes to the interest rate profile changing. And it's had an enormous impact on that profile of buyers. Your buyers in that kind of, you know, call it $500,000 to $700,000 more. It's crazy that I'm saying this, more entry level kind of price point for new construction. And so that kind of
certainly doubling, in some cases tripling of interest rate pro forma has had an impact. And they're losing significant earnest money, in some cases even additional money, because they've put up additional money to choose finishes and upgrades and all the other stuff that they've done throughout. But anyhow, that's a heartbreaking one.
Yeah, and I mean, and it's not even the buyer's fault, right? I mean, they can't even perform. It's not that they don't want to. In a lot of cases, they just literally cannot.
All right, last one that I'm getting a lot more of, and you guys will love this one. This may take us down a rabbit hole of all rabbit holes. Believe it or not, I'm getting a lot more phone calls about realtors moving around outside of their own marketplaces. What I call the traveling realtor phenomenon. It's amazing. And so this has been an issue for several years. And I've talked to you guys, I think, about this before. And I know it doesn't matter what market I go to, what local association I go to, the Pueblo realtors complain about the Colorado Springs realtors, and the, you know, I don't know, Royal Gorge complains about Colorado Springs and Pueblo both, and Denver complains about Fort Collins sometimes, and Boulder complains. You guys complain about just about everybody. And I'm empathetic to your plight. I really am. You're the closest resort market to kind of everybody being able to play in the realm, or thinking that they can play in the realm. And so a lot more calls on that, because again, people are like looking, they're going, hey, the activity and the busyness that I was having in my own marketplace is not as it's dried up a little bit, or I've got to extend my geographic competency just a little bit and push myself outside of the bounds. And you know, as frustrating it is for you guys on the listing broker side, I think primarily, I just remind listing brokers that, you know, if you're at the front end or even during the contract period and you're having frustration and questions about the buyer's broker's competency or contribution to the transaction, you have to be mindful first of your fiduciary obligations to your seller, right? In most cases, your seller doesn't really care where the buyer's broker is coming from. They want to sell their house. And that's going to become even more the case as we get a little bit more time on market and a little bit more stress. And so from my perspective, a breach of your fiduciary is probably a more significant violation of license law than a breach of the competency rule, quite frankly. And so just be careful of that. And at the same time, setting expectations, demanding what contribution and input a buyer broker from a different market or who's not a member of your MLS is bringing to the table is paramount. And you have every right to set expectations. And you have every right, remember, the offer of compensation doesn't extend outside of Summit MLS. Now, you can't unilaterally change that, but to the extent that you and your seller agree to make a modification to what you're offering, you know, that's something that you can set expectations very early on with a buyer's broker. But don't breach your fiduciary as you're seeing that. And I think, unfortunately, as frustrating as it's been for you guys, you're only going to see more of it. And it's just not going to go away because of the availability of information. Every broker in the world has access to the same property information that you guys have. And that is only something that's been the case for the last 8 or 10 years. So we're going to see more of that, I think, going forward, but just keep your heads on straight about it. The other thing that has blown my mind has been I've been talking to some brokers in other marketplaces. I'm hearing about like a Denver broker taking a listing up here and not even putting it in the Summit MLS. And I'm getting a lot of head nods. Now, to me, and I'd be curious, you and I haven't actually talked about this, but over the last probably month and a half, I've had a number of discussions with groups like this, and people are like, well, listing brokers are doing it too. And I'm like, I don't know how that could be. To me, that seems like a threshold competency violation, not entering a listing in the local market MLS.
I mean, unless it's driven by a seller, you know,
Completely.
I mean, you can
But what
see
would a seller's motivation be?
they're related to the broker. That's the only thing I can come up with. I mean, is that they're somehow related. Yeah, and a huge market of buyers is in Denver's. They're related. The seller says, I don't think we need to be in the local MLS, but it'd have to be something that was agreed to by the seller. That's the only way that it wouldn't be incompetence, as far as I can tell.
And that's something to be aware of. I think, if I'm a listing broker and I'm taking a listing, I'm outside of your MLS, I'm taking a listing and I'm not putting it on the local MLS. If I don't have in my file a explicit advisory written from the seller saying, seller, I'm warning you,
Don't you dare.
You're limiting your buyer pool substantially. You're making a bad decision, blah, blah, blah. And the seller saying, I agree, no problem.
Like that's the one thing that would get over the hump of a division of real estate investigation, I believe, just because I cannot believe that. I mean, sure, there's a huge buyer pool, but the largest single buyer broker pool for Summit County is sitting here, right? And so it makes no sense. Yeah, no, I get you're not supporting that, but
you mean you're not supportive?
but anyhow, so, and then the other thing is then it kind of defeats the purpose of clear cooperation policy, right?
Yeah.
Because now you guys are going, your buyers are going, I just drove by and saw this on RE Colorado, or I saw this on Zillow, or they're driving by, they see a sign, and they're like, you never told me about this listing. It's a crazy phenomenon. I'm not understanding how it's happening, but I've been getting a lot more chatter about it just over the last couple of months. So
Yeah, and what seems silly to me is if the Denver broker wanted to learn and be competent up here, then he should be just co-listing, or she should be co-listing with somebody up here so that you have it in both MLSs. And that would be competence. That would be the right way of doing things. But obviously, sometimes greed trumps.
did you have a question? Sorry.
Would you kindly elaborate on what it looks like to set expectations?
Well, I'd be curious to hear Damian's thoughts as well. But what I would tell people, or what I would tell a listing broker, is essentially this: like, hey, I'm happy to cooperate with you. Remember, there's two concepts at play. There's a duty or offer of cooperation, which is expected of everybody. That's a code of ethics mandate. You have to cooperate with everybody. Compensation is different. And I talked about that earlier. I will absolutely cooperate with you on this transaction. But if you want compensation on this transaction, then I expect your full participation in this transaction. I know you may see what's being offered on the MLS, but that offer of compensation is not to you. And I think an early conversation with a buyer broker about that, probably as early as when they call you going, hey, my buyer's up there skiing this weekend. Would you mind letting him into your listing? I think that's a good point to have that conversation. Happy to let him into the listing, because if the answer is no, I won't, now you've got some fiduciary concerns. But if the answer is, I'm happy to let him in the listing and I'm happy to work with you, but please understand, we're going to have to talk about compensation because that is not offered to you. And that's a pretty good way to open somebody's eyes pretty quickly, because I think a lot of brokers don't understand that. I mean, the number of calls that I get on the hotline from brokers who say, wait a second, I can't rely on the X percent. And as we're talking today, for any reason at all, please, I don't want to hear numbers about commission percentages or anything in this room, please. I think you guys are all aware of the issues and we'll probably talk about them. But anyhow, so, I can see what's being offered, but they don't understand that it's not necessarily extended to them. But I think having that conversation early and then demanding that expectation. No, I'm not going to meet your inspector and your buyers. I'm not going to let them in the house. I'm not going to do things over and above. Or if I do, then we're going to have a modification to whatever compensation I'm going to be giving you. And then obviously you've got to be working with your seller in that. And hopefully you have the support of your seller for that too. And I think most of you probably have that type of relationship with your seller where they're willing to support you in those discussions.
Yeah, I when it comes to setting expectations, I think it's more than just this topic. I think it's, talking to sellers about the contract and everything else. And the best thing that you guys can do is think to the future. So I've always said this: brokers are half full people. Okay, you look at this glass and you say, look at that, it's half full, right? Me, I'm a half empty kind of guy. In fact, I've been told that I'm completely empty, even though the glass is overflowing. But the point of this is that when, as lawyers, what we look at is what could possibly go wrong, okay? And everything we can think of. So when you're setting expectations with buyer brokers, sellers, buyers, whoever it is, think about all of the landmines that you're going to be navigating through the course of your relationship with these people, and help them understand these are some of the things we're going to have to look out for. Because if you set their expectations for the things that can go wrong, when they do go wrong, it's not a surprise. Everybody see that? So any of these expectations, you want to make sure that you're talking to them about, well, seller, just so you know, the buyer may not perform. They may have problems with their loan, or they may have an issue, and we may have to go back on the market. And our market is changing. So, I just want you to be prepared that if they terminate, we may have to give their money back, and we're going to have to do the best we can to try and get the best offer we can after that. But it helps set that expectation that when the inspection comes in and has all these listed items on it, well, remember, we idle back on the market if this doesn't work out. So maybe we want to be a little bit more generous to the buyer than we might have been in March. Okay. the other thing I'll say on this is when you're setting those expectations, it's good to have them in writing. Because like I said, people get amnesia. You know, they forget the things that you told them. And when you're talking on the phone, you can have the best advice in the world, but when something goes wrong, they don't remember it. And that's where we get sued. And then they say, oh, the broker promised me that this was never going to happen. Okay, so you know, having an email back behind after you talk to somebody about something saying, hey, it was great talking to you today, as we discussed, you know, we got a great offer here. However, there's no guarantees. You know, I just want to, you know, if anything comes up along the line, please contact me, whatever it is, but just do something that shows you had that conversation. And that goes for the buyer broker, that's the compensation, or, you know, whatever it happens to be. Set those expectations so your clients know things don't always go the way you want them to.
I talk a lot it comes up this year in my 10 things class, and I've talked about it in the past as well. And that's what I describe as like a 90-second email, right? It takes you like 90 seconds to write an email. And there's in every transaction, there's so many points. There's at least a handful of points. And sometimes there's many handful of points in a transaction where a 90-second email to your client to remind them of a discussion you've had is a bar of gold in your transaction file, right? I think a great example I like to use with this is title commitments. Buyer brokers, you know, once you get your title file set up and everything, you guys know everything gets distributed, everybody gets it. And I think too often buyer brokers are guilty of, you know, they see it and they call their buyer and go, hey, you know, I saw the title commitment. I saw you were copied on it. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks, bye. Right? Instead of a quick email forwarding that title commitment from you saying, hey, buyer, this is your title commitment. This is an incredibly important document that is loaded with not problems, with problems. Well, it could be problems, but it's loaded with potential issues related to your use, your enjoyment, other people's use, access to, you know, it could be mineral right. I mean, you don't have to be overly lawyerly about it, but please, please, please pay attention to this thing. Because when they don't and they close and they realize that, you know, a neighbor's got a right to throw a barn party every third Tuesday in their backyard. And that's not an actual example, but
that's going to say, where did that come from?
I wish somebody would call me on the hotline so I could use that, but you get my point. There's some encumbrance, or there's oil and gas drilling, or there's, you know, something that comes up when they actually move in, or 6 months or 2 years after they move in. Who do they blame? And at the same time, you're in a weird spot with title commitments or title commitments, specifically the exceptions, because you can't review those with your client. It's by practice of law, by rule.
Yeah.
And so, but that email to say to them, hey, you need to review this. Let me know if you have questions. And if you do, let's get you with a lawyer. But please don't just overlook this buyer, because title policies are like, it's like a, you know, foreign script to brokers, let alone your buyers. And they just naturally want to not pay attention to them. And so anyhow, that's one perfect example of every time in every transaction, working with every buyer, forward them the title commitment and say, hey, please don't skip over this document. It's super important. Yeah. I'll just repeat it, the question. If you, yeah.
When it comes to title, and someone's put a lien against
Lis pendens. You're asking, so when somebody has a lawsuit filed against property and they've encumbered the property, it's called lis pendens, that's filed against and it'll show up in the title work, and you cannot sell the property.
So what has to be done until it can be sold?
Court.
And then do you need an issue of an order of that it's dismissed?
You need something that's a release of lis pendens. So sometimes the parties come to a settlement. So the question is what happens when you have a lis pendens against property, and how do you get those released? And so we have one where they filed a lis pendens. It was one of these cases where the seller decided that they were in a signing mood. And so they signed 2 contracts, which I got to tell you, you have to work at it to sign 2 contracts, but nonetheless, they signed 2. Blame the broker, because that must be the broker's fault, because you made me go in, choose a script, check the box, say that I agree to the terms, do the signature, send it out, hit accept. Apparently the broker was at fault for this, but nonetheless, they filed a lis pendens to try and get the property. And it was leverage. What they were trying to do is leverage to make it so that buyer number 2 couldn't close on the property. This is not a great idea, and brokers, you should not be doing this at all. In fact, you cannot do this because it's against a whole bunch of license law. But the story is that they used it as leverage to try and get a settlement. And they did end up getting a settlement out of it. Shouldn't have, because there was all sorts of problems, but going to court was more costly. And when they settled, what they got was a release of lis pendens from the person that filed the lawsuit. They dismissed the lawsuit, and then they were able to sell it to buyer number 2.
What about in a case where there's a mechanics lien?
So the question is about mechanics liens. Mechanics liens are different. And the reason mechanics liens are different is because they give you a super priority lien, but after 120 days, they fall off unless you take action against them. Mechanics liens are one of those things that the material men and the suppliers like to use as leverage. But the problem with them is that in order to enforce a mechanics lien, you have to go to district court and you don't get your attorney fees. And you have to do it within 120 days, otherwise they evaporate. So sometimes when you have a mechanics lien against the property and the seller says, I do not owe this money, I don't want to pay this contractor because he's a twit. I'm using PG words too. Then they can sometimes go ahead and escrow around it. So if the lien was $30,000, then they could put up $45,000. Title company will hold it. If they pursue the lien, then they might interplead it or something, let them defend the lawsuit. And if they don't, then at the end of it, they'll give the money back to the seller.
But in any case, those are going to be exceptions to a title policy.
Absolutely.
Okay, if somebody purchased.
Or a requirement.
Somebody buys a property and there was a mechanics lien with the previous, with the seller, and that's allegedly resolved, can they come back and to the new?
If it resides on the exceptions when the well, yes is the answer. Either way, it's just a matter of whether if it's on the exceptions, then they would only have recourse against the owner. If it's been removed from the exceptions, then the title policy would ensure the buyer, the new owner, and it would be the title company's problem.
And what they'll do sometimes in that instance is they'll go to the seller, they'll put it as a requirement that you got to get a release of this mechanics lien. And the seller say, I don't want to pay that, but I'll do an escrow. And the title company will say, that's fine. That'll meet our requirement needs. And then they'll insure over it for the buyer because they got $45,000 sitting here that they know if it pursues it, they can pay off the lien.
Do you have a question?
Yes. So the question is the role of the broker is to receive the title commitment and not necessarily review it. So I'll let you answer. I just want to make sure.
No, you're good about that. I always forget. I get like all.
I want to answer.
I mean, to my mind, it's the most difficult area to navigate as a broker. And when you get a good cadence with it, particularly as a buyer broker, as a listing broker, you don't have as much to think about. The requirements are much more important to be thinking about as a listing broker. And that's essentially, the title company saying, we're not even going to give this policy unless all this stuff gets done. But as a buyer broker, it's a much more delicate conversation to be able to have because your buyers look to you for everything. They want to hear, I'm the real estate professional and here's what all this stuff means. But the bottom line is when you go click on those exceptions links, those are heavy duty documents in many cases. Sometimes, obviously with community associations and bylaws that are all recorded against the property, easements can be incredibly complicated. And covenants, I mean, oil and gas leases, water rights, there's all kinds of stuff that's in there that you as a broker specifically under license law aren't allowed to touch. But that conversation with your buyer about what your brokerage limitations are is a conversation that you need to get good with. And because they don't want to hear from you, talk to an attorney, right? But however in your own personal style, you can navigate that email that I'm talking about, which is to say like, hey, this is a super important document. I'm unfortunately not allowed to advise you on this title commitment, or I can't interpret the exceptions for you. However is most natural for you to have that conversation. Just get good at it and do it the same way with every single buyer.
Yeah, this is one of those emails, I don't call it a 90-second email. This is one that you should have prepared ahead of time, period. It should be in your email list that every time you get a title commitment in, this is the email that goes out. And I like something along the lines of, Dear Mr. Buyer, please see the attached title commitment that came in today from XYZ Title Company. Please note that it has 3 different parts, a Schedule A that talks about the insured parties and the uninsured parties, the Schedule B1 requirements, which talks about what has to happen prior to us closing, and the Schedule B2 exceptions that talks about how you're taking title. The Schedule B2 exceptions is a very important part of this document as it tells you what you can and cannot do on the property. This is something you should review very carefully to make sure that you understand what your rights and remedies are in here. As a real estate broker, I cannot advise or review these for you. Sorry, did I do this too quickly?
They're going to ask you to slow down and repeat this.
Whoops, it's recorded. I've written it a couple times.
I know, but you know that, and that's an overly lawyered way in some ways. The point is that discussion in your voice with your client is how you're going to be most comfortable sending that email. The point is sending that email, right? I mean,
and a couple of the high points, guys, is number one, make sure you review it. Number two, I can't really help you with this. Number three, you can talk to the title company about looking at this if you have questions. But number four, if they don't answer your questions to your satisfaction, we need to find you a lawyer. Those are the four components of this. Okay, that's what you need to have in there because it shows good advice about giving them advice on that title company.
sometimes Damian slips into this sort of savant mode that I just go like, and that's what I had one of those moments right now where he was like literally writing like dictating, you know, an email or something that anyhow, that was, he's a very smart guy. I hate to give him that much credit, but
you gave me credit as smart. Thank you.
There's savants and there's idiot savants.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
I didn't say, anyhow, any other questions on any of that stuff? See what flowed out of competency? Uh-huh.
Repeat the question.
Yeah. So yeah, is there anything you can do about out of market brokers taking listings in market? I'm not listening to the MLS. I mean, I hate to encourage complaints.
Yeah.
I really
That's
do.
hard. I mean, sometimes you have to, but
at the end of the day,
times,
I don't know how a complaint to the Division of Real Estate, you would know as well as any division investigator. If the division received,
I am not an investigator. Just
no, but he does a lot more work in that sort of, you know, immediate realm than I do. But if the Division of Real Estate received a complaint from a consumer, from a licensee, from anybody that said this listing is being listed in this market and it's not on the local MLS, do you believe that the division would assign that to an investigator who would then request a copy of the listing agreement at a minimum from the listing broker to say, has your seller acknowledged that you're limiting the buyer pool?
yeah, and I'll tell you, if you're going to file that complaint, first of all, you're better off having a buyer do it for you because they'll take it more seriously. That's their job, is to protect the public. Yeah. And when a broker files a complaint against another broker, it looks like sour grapes. And so you got to remember that's the lens that they look through things. But I'm with Scott. I just don't know how an investigator would see this from a buyer that says, I've been harmed because this didn't show up on the MLS. My broker wasn't able to show it to me because they didn't put it in the MLS here. And we think that they breached their duty to their seller by not putting it in local MLS. I don't know. The investigator, I think, no matter what, is going to investigate it. It'll get assigned to an investigator. They're going to investigate it. And the question is going to be, did the broker have some authority from the seller that the seller literally told them to do this?
And I think explicit authority.
Explicit authority. I agree.
I just, that scenario to me is, it just, from a pure competency rule, as well as fiduciary.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of elements to this. There's no scenario that makes sense to me that any right-minded, fully informed seller would ever say, I'm not listing my property on the local MLS. It just makes no sense. I mean, okay, so Tom Cruise selling his ranch and Telluride wants to list on the Los Angeles MLS, whatever it is. Maybe something like that. Like that's his buyer pool, right? Maybe. But in that case, you know, he's probably not
explicit, and it better be explicit.
Yeah, and it better be explicit. Like, hey, seller, from the broker to the seller, hey, seller, you are limiting your buyer pool severely. This is highly unorthodox. This makes no rational sense. And then the seller still says, yes, I want to do it. In that case, no problem at all. But almost anything less than that, I've got to believe that there's some breach of fiduciary, some breach of competency, maybe a handful of other things that are going on in that case. And so I don't want to, again, I'm not telling you to file a complaint. I'm not encouraging you to encourage your buyers to file a complaint. But to me, there's something very fishy going on. Maybe it's you reaching out to the broker yourself saying, this is odd.
Yeah.
Have you fully informed this with your buyer? And if they're a total, would you say twit?
Twit. I use twit.
Or I was going to say,
you said jerk.
Yeah, I was going to say jerk. I wasn't going to say that. But if they're a jerk to you and say, yeah, pound sand, mind your own friggin' business, then I say, go file your complaint. But if they're like, well, you know, if they try to be accommodating, if they say, oh, I'm going to you know, I don't know. I mean, but
This is my cousin's, they can't afford to, I'm discounting fees or whatever the case may be, and
the listing
Who
thing
knows?
makes no sense. It just, I can't see
Yeah.
a scenario that would make any sense. So to the extent that our marketplaces are seeing that, I would be highly, highly skeptical that that seller has had any mindful discussion at all coming from the listing broker. It just doesn't make sense to me. But Dana, do you have a question? New topic, hit us. She's ready to move on.
she's like, enough of this, we're done.
At the bottom now, there's that section that says seller survives closing. Basically.
The inspection, you mean the inspection objection?
Resolution.
I think what you're talking about is in the contract. There was a change in the contract that talks about that, that there now is a survival clause for that if the seller doesn't do what they were supposed to do, and after signing an agreement and said they were going to do it, there's a provision now that says that it survives closing, that the buyer may have remedies against the seller. Is that, I think that's probably what you're referring to.
That's in the contract to buy and sell. I think
Yeah,
it's the
contract to
single
buy and sell.
greatest change to the contract to buy and sell.
I thought it was pretty good too. But
Traditionally, when you talk to the title company, they don't want to put money in.
Well, the lenders often don't. Title,
Right.
title companies may or may not want to hold it, but lenders often don't want to put, they often don't allow escrows. I think it's more of a lender problem. Most title companies for closing escrows, most of them will do it. They may not
they
love it.
won't hold it for a long time, but they don't
No.
mind holding it for a short time. Yeah.
So are there any other options besides escrowing with the title company?
So I think what your question is, so that I can,
$10,000 could be $20,000.
so I think your question is this, is that buyer and seller agree to fix something. The thing can't get fixed until after closing. The buyer still wants to close, the seller still wants to close, even though they can't get it fixed. And the question is, is there something besides escrowing it that you can do? And my answer is, I can't think of one.
Well, but you can rely on the new provision in the contract.
You could.
I mean, it's
you-
not
you could-
ideal. It's not ideal.
Yeah, I mean, the seller wants something else because they want a surety that they're not going to get sued after closing happens, that they didn't finish this and now they're getting a lawsuit instead with attorney fees, costs and everything else.
No, but I'm saying on behalf of the buyer. So the reason I like
I think she was talking on behalf of the seller.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So just saying the repair could cost $10,000, it could cost $20,000. Seller wants to maybe credit $10,000 at closing, but cover that other $10,000 if it's necessary. For repair, 'cause sometimes you don't know what a repair is.
Well, that's going to be a separate contract then or legal agreement. If you're not going to escrow the full amount, then, and there's going to be, we agree to some point post closing, pay for any overages,
Differences, yeah.
then that would have to be something prepared, I think, by an attorney.
It could be I think it'd be in the contract. I would put in there that this provision survives closing. Even though I think it does. But I would make sure that you're clear. But yeah, I think you could put in crediting 10,000 in the event that the repair costs up to $10,000 more, the seller agrees to contribute to buyer any difference up to $10,000, and this provision survives closing. I think you could do that. The one thing you have to watch out for is that it has to go to the lender. And so if you send it to the lender and they say, hey, wait a minute, there's a $20,000 repair that you're not making on a property that bad Tom. But our collateral isn't protected because there's this $20,000 repair that may or may not get done, and we have a loan against it. So that you could do it, but you're going to have to make sure that the lender, and when I say lender, I don't mean the MLO. I mean the lender underwriter person, because the MLOs are nice to tell you guys you can do all sorts of things that are illegal. But you need to know that the underwriter is going to be on board with it, and it's going to show up on closing statements, and they're going to get a copy.
Damian and I were laughing about this yesterday, and we've probably laughed about it before, but the number of brokers who said, oh, the lender said it's okay. And I'm like, I'm guessing that's not the underwriter who's the lender. That's the MLO who's a salesperson trying to get a closing just like you are, right? So don't rely on what they're saying. It's the underwriter is the lender. That's so often conflated by people. But this is a good discussion point. The reason it's not probably my favorite change, but it's a really good, it was an easy fix to the contract. I used to get a lot of times calls from buyer brokers who do a walkthrough, and they're supposed to close in 3 hours. They're doing a walkthrough, and they'd be like, "We did this thing, and there's something the seller agreed to repair. It wasn't in the inspection resolution." Remember, the inspection resolution for years has had that survivability language at the bottom.
Any of these obligations that aren't done prior to closing will survive closing and so shall still be obligated. The contract didn't have that. And so let's say that there was an amend extend that was done. And so it was in the contract. There wasn't that same survivability for some deck repair or something. A minor thing, buyer didn't want to walk away from the contract. They still wanted to close, but they didn't have that contractual assurity that if the seller didn't post-closing fix that item, that they could come back if they really needed to and sue them or force them to do it in some other way. But now with what paragraph is it in the contract? You
Oh,
know?
for God's sakes.
Well, I tell you, he's a savant. I figure he'd be like, anyhow.
I think it's in 15. No,
Anyhow, it's a clause that basically says anything in the contract, not just the inspection resolution, but anything in the contract that isn't completed prior to closing, the seller would still have an obligation to do throughout. And it was such a simple fix. I know Damian made it, but it was a very simple fix that has a really nice impact on a buyer who's kind of in that uncertain place going like, well, we didn't do it in the inspection resolution. I still want to close. How am I going to be certain that I can force the seller to do it post-closing if I need to? Now you got the contract, so it works. So anyhow.
And there was arguments with the resolution that it didn't survive too, which made it even more complicated. So,
Well, the merger doctrine and all the other stuff.
yeah, but this fixed all that stuff. So
Yeah. Okay. What's the next topic or question?
did we answer everything? I
ready to
feel
be
like we
done?
kind of went down rabbit holes and maybe not finished conversations. Sell my house in 40 years. I love this.
This
one.
is a good one. I'll let Dame.
Hey, you remember the whole conversation about title commitments? This is why they're important. So you're really going to go change into your swimsuit, aren't you?
You can talk about this topic. I'll be back.
Yeah, like that. Is that great? I'm glad I'm on film for that. Okay, so this is so there is a company, a brokerage firm. We're not going to say who they are, but the brokerage firm has come up with a innovative way of making sure they get listings. And what they do is this, is they advertise and they say, and Tom, I'm picking on you because you sat in the back. So wish you hadn't done that, huh? So Tom, I'll tell you what, you don't have to sell your house. How would you just like some money? And the seller says, well, gosh, that sounds great. I like money. And they say, well, what we're going to do, Tom, is we're going to give you $2,100 and we're going to enter into an agreement. And what the agreement says is that if you decide to sell your house, you agree to use us. And we're going to memorialize that agreement with a memorandum of understanding or agreement or whatever the heck they're calling it. And what it'll say is that it's a lien against the property that inures to the benefit of successors and signs and says if you sell your property without using us, you owe the full commission we would have gotten under our agreement. And that's sweet. And it runs for 40 years. Yeah, and the interesting thing is that this company is literally in 32 states. I mean, they're across the entire nation. So we're hearing it all over the place of different things that are coming up from it. And there's all sorts of problems with this program, I'll tell you. First of all, you know, the title wonks will say, well, wait a minute, when you got this memorandum of understanding, it refers to a wild document, so it shouldn't be enforceable. And there's questions whether it's enforceable or not. But I've had it come up twice. The first time I had it come up was in Glenwood Springs. And the broker happened to catch it. Remember how you're not supposed to review exceptions? What I'll say is this, don't have the expectation that your buyer thinks you review exceptions, okay? If you look at them, I get you guys look at them. I know that, I'm not naive, but don't set it's not your job. You're not supposed to do it. It's not something you can do on behalf of your buyer. Does everybody see the difference there? Now, if you see something, you might want to say something, say, I happened to glance at your title commitment and noticed that there's this weird thing about you have to sell your house in 40 years through somebody else. Did you know about that? Okay, so that might be something worth doing. But the guy that had it, the broker represented the buyers. He says, what is this thing? I said, tell him to remove it. Turns out that the listing broker was this brokerage firm. And what they said is, oh, we'll go ahead and remove it. We just don't remove it unless somebody asks us to. Think about that. So the seller performs under the contract, but we're going to leave it as an encumbrance against the buyer moving forward. Isn't that awesome? Oh, dear God.
I got halfway there.
Well, in that case, just
I now I have a right foot and a left-footed flip-flop on. So
does that make you feel better?
Much
Are
better.
you feeling
I'm
a little
happy now.
awkward?
I'm happy now.
So, but the other one I saw was this, and this one was out of Castle Rock. So the buyer went under, so story is that the seller took $2,100. 9 months later, decided to sell their house. Buyer put it under contract, closed. Nobody looked at the title commitment. After closing, or right before closing, this brokerage firm had filed a lis pendens against the property to collect what they should have gotten. I'll just tell you the numbers. The numbers were $2,100 that the seller got. They now owed 21. The buyer who closed on the property now owed 21,000 under their agreement. Okay, so that's the way this thing is looking. But the important part about, it may have gotten turned into the real estate commission.
There could have been a result too.
There could have been a result. So the investigators said that so here's the reason this is important is that if you're representing buyers, remember that email we talked about, making sure how important it is that you send that out? This is why, because there's 614 of these in Colorado. And the real estate commission at its meeting, and it's just because they didn't say who the brokerage firm was, but I happen to know the complaint well enough to know who it was. They essentially said, we're voting for revocation, $15,000 fine per incident, which is, there's 2 of them at this point, the 2 complaints that they had. Public censure, I'm like, oh, well, that's going to do a lot. And we're referring it to the Attorney General's Consumer Protection Department. So I don't know what's going to come out of this, but keep in mind that there's 614 of these. And if everybody got $1,000 to $2,000 like this other seller did, does everybody see how that's real money that they just got obliterated for them? So we're probably going to see this one end up in the ALJ and then probably maybe even the Court of Appeals. But again, if you're representing sellers or buyers, it's important to understand that this is out there. This is a risk to both of them. So anyways, do you have anything to add since you didn't listen to my whole spiel?
I just wish I was one of the homeowners that had agreed to do this because I don't think any of these are enforceable and I could have gotten a check for a few grand at least.
Yeah, it would have been nice.
Yeah.
I thought about it, but
Coulda, woulda, shoulda. Anyhow, that's an interest. No, I mean, to me, it's fascinating what they're doing. Well, I won't get into it. They could have structured this in a better way.
I don't think we should really tell people
how
how
to structure this better
because I don't think
make it compliant.
Yeah, I don't think the Division of Real Estate really liked it at all. So
if you want to engage the Cox law firm, he'll maybe give you some legal advice on how to structure something like this. It could be compliant and an interesting business model, but
yeah,
40 years is way too long either way.
Yeah. Is there any way to look up on somebody's house if they have one of these? The best way is the TBD title commitment. Which guys, we're heading into a market that's, we haven't had to worry about. Everybody know what a TBD title commitment is? Okay, so a TBD title commitment is we don't know who the buyer is, but we want a title commitment. Title company usually charges, I don't know what it is up here. It's usually $100 or a couple $100. And then they credit it towards the final title policy when the seller closes the transaction. So it's not lost altogether. You can also do an O&E, ownership and encumbrances, and they'll pull a lot of those documents that come up. You just want to make sure they're doing name searches as well, but a lot of times those will pull them up too. We got away from those in the last several years because equity was going up, prices were going up, and there wasn't a whole lot of risk of sellers, having something that couldn't be cleared by whatever the purchase price happened to be. The market that we're heading into when we start talking short sales, foreclosures, judgment liens, tax liens, all this other stuff, is if the market gets tough, you can see where it's a listing broker, you might want to know that ahead of time so that you know whether or not they're going to be able to convey the property. Excuse me. Sorry about that.
Bless you.
So I would start getting in the habit of getting in either an O&E or a TBD title commitment to, that way you can talk to the sellers and say, well, here's the requirements, what has to be released in order for us to sell the property. This would likely show up as a requirement because it's a seller obligation, which the worst part about it is if the seller has the obligation to them, the brokerage firm, you can see where that hurts you guys. But then apparently you can just file a complaint. So maybe that makes it go away. I don't know.
O&Es are $5-10 maybe. Those aren't.
They might be different up here. What are your guys' O&Es?
Yeah, they're not expensive.
That's not bad.
I like for listing brokers to get those before they even take the listing. And
yes.
I mean, you look sharp showing up with your seller and talking about, some of the periphery things, at least. A lot of brokers don't do that. And it's a I don't want to say marketing advantage, but it helps you kind of lean into some of your strengths at least. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right, new topic. Yeah. All right.
Antitrust. That's it. Should I go change?
Yeah, go put on your funny stuff.
I didn't bring mine over.
Be
but-
giving this is my first update in Hawaiian shorts. That's first outfit change. A lot of first here in Summit County for me today. So
First time
antitrust.
wearing two right shoes.
Who's the first? Another three first. I'm sure we'll see how the day goes. It'll be my first dunk tank in Summit County.
Yeah.
I've done dunk tanks before. I've been a victim of a dunk tank before. Antitrust. So kind of not a lighthearted matter, a pretty serious matter. There's a couple of things going on. Our industry is under an unbelievable microscope, coming from a couple of different directions, primarily related to, in all of these cases, NAR's MLS policy that mandates an offer of compensation. So we talked about the offer to compensate. It's mandated by NAR, National Association of Realtors, MLS policy throughout the entire country for any realtor-owned MLS. You have to offer compensation to a cooperating broker within that MLS, another MLS participant, as you guys know. And our industry's relied on it for generations. And the things that are going on, or the challenges that are come from a couple of different fronts. One of them are two lawsuits that are percolating, actually three now. Again, it was three, and then it was two, and now it's back to three, that are percolating. One in federal district court in Illinois, one in federal district court in Missouri, and Morrill and Sitzer are the two named plaintiffs there. The basis of it, of the lawsuits, the allegations, are essentially saying your industry, realtors, and the respondents, I should say, are NAR, Remax, Realogy, Keller Williams, and Home Services. Those four realtor franchise brands represent, I think I saw a number, it was like 67% of the licensed realtor population in the country. So those are the five respondents in this lawsuit. And the allegations in both lawsuits are identical, and the respondents are identical. It's just the law firms essentially that are representing the plaintiffs are not identical. They're two different law firms. And basically the allegation is this: your industry has colluded and conspired for generations to harm consumers through the mandatory offer of compensation in the MLS. And while there has never been and never has existed any mandatory minimum offer of compensation, you can quite literally offer 1 penny or 0.00001% or whatever it is. There's no mandatory minimum. What has evolved has been effectively some mystery, crazy number that could have never evolved without some level of collusion and conspiracy between all of you industry participants. And this is where I don't want to talk about numbers, but they can say, and this comes out of their lawsuit, you can go to, Portland, Maine to Miami, Florida. No, what is it? Portland, Maine to San Diego, California, Portland, Oregon to Miami, Florida. And to any room of realtors in any place in the country in between, and you can ask them what a buyer agent commission is, and it falls into an incredibly narrow range. Now that's a concerning point, because if there's no mandatory minimum, then how in the world could that ever be? And they also say the United States of America is the only country in the world that has a mandatory offer of compensation like this. It's the only country in the world. In the rest of the developed world, if you take the average buyer broker compensation in the rest of the developed world, every place other than the United States of America, I'll use a number here, and I forget exactly what it is because it comes out of one of the plaintiffs' lawsuits. It's below 0.4% for a buyer broker is the average in the rest of the developed world. That's a kind of a different spread from what it looks like in the United States of America, and that goes to part of their allegations as well. And it's interesting, there's some compelling concern about that. And so these sellers have essentially said that we have been harmed. This is the class of sellers that have been harmed. We've listed our home and for 50, 75 years been harmed. This plaintiff class is anybody who sold their home in the United States of America since 2016 and paid a buyer broker and offer a cooperating commission through the MLS. It's a massive plaintiff class. This is not just in Illinois and Missouri. This is in the entire United States of America. So it's a massive class of potential plaintiffs that they're trying to fill. And when we talk about federal class action lawsuits, you think of, mesothelioma, Roundup litigation, all the stuff you see on the
Big
commercials.
tobacco.
Big tobacco. In fact, the law firm that is representing Morrill in Illinois is out of Chicago. It's the exact same law firm that took down Big Tobacco. They were the lead law firm on the Big Tobacco litigation.
J.R. Reynolds and all that.
Yeah, they are loaded for bear. Katie Johnson, who's my counterpart at NAR, she says that that law firm has a team of paralegals for the last 3.5 years. All they've done is their entire job is to scour the social media pages of realtors in the United States of America looking for evidence of collusionary behavior to support this. And they have loads of it. Because guess what? And I get it forwarded to me all the time. Look, can you believe somebody posted this on their Facebook page, Scott? And it's somebody saying, I've took my buyers to this builder and this builder only paid me X%. They didn't pay me my full market commission.
Yeah.
And then you get all their realtor friends on the comments section going, yeah, they did that to me too. I'm not taking my buyers back.
This is terrible.
Yeah, this is terrible. I mean, that's just one piece of it, but that's everybody's paying attention, and it's all just realtors throwing gasoline on this fire that is already burning. I think, unfortunately, the horse is a little bit out of the barn on these things. Sitzer was certified as a class about a month and a half ago, maybe 2 months ago. So the court in Missouri said after years of NAR and everybody trying to fight back, say no certification, they don't have any class similarities, or they don't have a proper class. They were certified as a class. It's moving forward. I was in, I think it was Colorado Springs about a month ago, and I was talking about this issue, and she brought up a letter to me. She said, I thought you'd be interested to see this. And it was from the law firm, because she and her husband had a vacation property they sold in Ozarks. And she got a letter that she sold it like 3 years ago. She got a letter from this law firm saying, hey, you may have been harmed. You may have overpaid commissions to your seller. She's like, should I sign it? I'm like, it's up to you, but I don't know. It's kind of, shooting yourself in the foot, maybe. So they're now actively filling their class. Moral will be certified in Illinois shortly. There's no doubt it's going to be certified. And those two are moving forward. And this is a discussion we're going to be having for probably years to come. NAR has said we will fight these things tooth and nail. It goes to the very core of our industry. There are so many great reasons that we have our system set up as we do in the United States of America. Buyers
for the benefit of the consumer.
Yes, and the MLS policies are pro-consumer, they're pro-competitive. There's so many great reasons for how we've structured things. Buyers don't have the money to come out of pocket and pay their own brokers at the closing table. But that's what happens in the rest of the developed world because we don't have this. When a buyer's got to cut a check for $10,000, let's just say as a number, to their buyer broker at closing, that's $10,000 less that they can put toward their down payment. Well, that's in a traditional 80-20 mortgage, that's $50,000 less in money they can spend on a home. So sellers benefit as well because it keeps property values perpetuated. There's so many good reasons for what our system is, but it's really under attack in a very significant way. And we're partially to blame as an industry because of all the stuff and all the discussions and this natural cadence of X%. It's a problem. It's only throwing fuel on the fire. So I would encourage you guys to be very, very cautious about that because of the lawsuits. The other thing I'll say about NAR, and write this down. It's up here. So competition.realtor. I would encourage you guys to go to that website. Just type that in. It'll take you to a landing page on NAR's website. It is, in my opinion, one of the single greatest justifications for our industry, for our MLS system, for what we do, what you guys do as realtors, the value you provide, because your value proposition is under attack. That's what this all comes down to. And so I believe, whether you like it or not, you're going to be,
you're jumping the gun.
Unbelievable. I'm done. Now you know what color his damn nails are. It wasn't that much of it. Yeah, reveal. But your value proposition is under attack, and that's what the core of these lawsuits do. So that's the sellers. Buyers is the other one, and that's Leader. Leader filed a lawsuit. This is another law firm on behalf of buyers saying, well, geez, if sellers have been harmed, then buyers have been harmed because effectively the additional high inflated commissions that buyer brokers are paid by sellers, that money is in some way passed on to the buyer through the purchase price, lack of concessions, whatever it may be, and therefore buyers have been harmed. So, and that one's percolating through the system as well. Same concept, antitrust. 3 lawsuits that are actively kicking around in that. Plus, if you add this one's back in play now, clear cooperation, which again is based in antitrust, then there's 4 of these lawsuits that are floating around, all kind of similar theories, collusionary behavior among our industry. Then we have the investigations, the DOJ and FTC investigations, and that's we're in a holding period right now. Right after the lawsuits were filed, the Trump Department of Justice issued a CID, a civil information demand, to CoreLogic, who's the backbone behind many of the MLSs in the United States of America, saying, we want all of your records throughout the United States pertaining to 2 particular areas. One is, what are the offers of compensation throughout the United States of America? Is there some pattern or whatever could this be? And 2 is, what are your public and private data fields in MLSs? Those are the two areas of focus. So DOJ sends a subpoena, it's not a complaint. They don't say what they're looking for. They just say, send us your stuff. We didn't know what they were doing for about 18 months. And then we figured out or realized in December of 2020 what was going on when NAR and the Department of Justice jointly released had a press release. They said after 18 months of investigation, NAR and DOJ have agreed to settle this investigation. And the DOJ agreed that in exchange for NAR doing a couple of things. One is syndicating cooperating commissions across, making it a public data field across all syndications. So just like bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, price, it's available on any syndicated portal. What is the buyer agent offered commission? That has not been the case in most places forever, ever in the past. It's been hidden. So they were going to do that. They were going to no more free advertising for brokerage firms. We don't have a lot of this in Colorado, but I think in other states, they've got a lot of buyer broker firms that advertise our services are free, no cost to you, this kind of thing. That's not really the case. So no more of that. And then they had some lockbox access agreement that they had agreed to. So three basic things. In exchange for NAR agreeing to that, the DOJ agreed that they wouldn't initiate another investigation in antitrust against NAR for, I think it was 15 years. It may have been 10. It was a long period of time. December of 2020. And they said, we're going to finalize this agreement in the first quarter of 2021. Well, something else changed in the first quarter of 2021 in the Washington, D.C. We got a new president. We got a new attorney general, a new head of the Department of Justice, a very different perspective on some of these issues. And that agreement never got finalized in the first quarter of 2021. It never got finalized in the second quarter of 2021. And July 1st of 2021, the Biden administration came out and said, deal's off the table. We're not doing this. We're recommencing our own investigation into these exact issues from scratch. We're adding the FTC to the investigation to investigate as well, and we'll be back in touch. And they're looking at the exact same issues that these lawsuits are looking at. So that was a year ago, July 1st. So we're 13, 14 months later. We don't know what's going on, but this is all the same stuff that they're looking at, all these same theories. And so point is this, I guess two big things that I would say. One is we've got to be better as an industry about this issue. We just have to be. There is no such thing as a minimum offer of compensation. And we also have to be better advocates for ourselves and what we do. The value proposition that you guys bring to the table is amazing. And it's getting harder and harder and harder to articulate, particularly for buyer brokers. If you went back 10 years, buyer brokers' value proposition could be as simple as, I have access to the MLS. Pal.
Do you know how hard it is to take you seriously right now, just so you know?
I know, this is probably not the best outfit for
but it's being recorded, so it's okay.
There you go. It's a Hawaiian theme. That's why I'm doing this. This is a Hawaiian theme. So we've got to be better as an industry, and we have to, about how we talk about commissions and have those conversations. We've got to be better as an industry about how we're articulating our value proposition. And this is the place to start is particularly as a buyer broker. Listing broker is a little bit easier, but for our industry as a whole, spending some time there and thinking about what your value proposition is, the stuff that you bring to the table, it's all different, but everybody, the nice thing, and Damian and I have talked about this, everybody in this room brings something. You wouldn't be here otherwise. You have lots of friends and colleagues who are out on their mountain bikes, doing something else. They would never come to a thing like this. They just wouldn't. But you guys, at a minimum, have a value proposition, but being able to identify, define, and articulate that to your client is going to become much, much, much more important as our industry becomes more, as the information playing fields becomes flatter and flatter, as more technologies emerge. There's a lot of really competing technologies against what brokers do I've seen these these self-executing contract platforms, and there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. And so we need to be good about those couple of things and realize that there's a lot of eyeballs on what we're doing right now. So, yeah. It's not a script, it's easy. I think when you're a listing broker and you're going to talk to your seller, because that's where the conversation begins, is with your seller, right? Because that's who's making the offer of compensation. Well, the problem is this, they go, well, we got to offer this X% because that's the market. That's what we all pay here.
That's what we have to pay to get a buyer broker to show the property, which shouldn't be true.
Absolutely
right?
shouldn't be
you have
true.
Fiduciary duties. So it should be, we should negotiate. I'm sorry, I'll let you,
well, no,
you have a good script on this.
Yeah, and then I've been talking a long time, so I'll let you say whatever you want to say in a second, but my advice to listing brokers is when you go sit down with a seller and give them a listing pitch, what do? You typically put together a spreadsheet, say, here's where I say you should be pricing your home. And it's based on these 5 or 7 or 10 sales comps. Here's address, square footage, days on market, purchase price or list price, sale price, whatever. Add a column to that. Offered compensation. Those may look the same or very similar down that column, but it emphasizes to your seller that they can make the choice. It's one of their decision matrix choices about what they are authorizing you or agreeing with you to offer to compete to competing brokers, right? And it's important for them to understand that it's not there's no minimums, there's no Summit County norms. There really shouldn't be. And I think for too long it's been a very irresponsible discussion that's taken place that has led to, again, across the entire United States of America, a very consistent range in many cases of what a buyer's agent is or a buyer broker is offered.
And if you're the buyer broker, I mean, the fear here is that if sellers start to get involved in these, and we think about the market back last year or back to March, we started seeing compression of broker commissions. You started seeing that sellers like, wait a minute, we got multiple offers. Why do we have to pay as much in commission or whatever? And so there was some compression. But as a buyer broker, you guys do have a good value proposition. It starts with your buyer listing contract that you should be doing at the very beginning of that representation with your buyer. Number one, you should be getting it signed and have it say that they're obligated to pay if you can't get the price from somebody else. The second thing is talking about what it is you do for that commission that you earn. Because that is your agreement with the buyer saying, look, I work for a living. You don't go to work every day and have somebody come in and say, you know what, today we're going to just not pay you because we don't feel like it. I mean, this is your job. And they need to understand it is a real job. It is a real profession. And then talk about the things that you offer. To me, in Colorado, the best thing you guys do, contracts. You have a right to practice law in a limited capacity. That is not the same with many states across the country. But you guys have a right to interpret the contracts, tell them how to negotiate the contracts, go through the contracts, fill them out, complete them. I mean, that's one thing that you have that a lot of your peers in other states do not have. And you need to start talking about what you do. I mean, you don't have to be the person that has all the answers. You don't need to know, you don't need to be the inspector and the appraiser and everything else, but you do need to know how to find that information for them and be that conduit. That to me is the most value you add, is that you got the contracts and then you're the conduit for helping them find the information they need to make an informed decision about the purchase that they're making. And you need to be able to have that conversation with them so that they understand that's why I get paid this much, because this is the body of work that I do for you. Frankly, I like it to tell people that it's like a duck on a pond. If you feel like this, you watch the duck go across the pond and it just moves smoothly like it's no effort, then that means I did a good job, because underneath the water, we're paddling like hell. And they need to understand, they need to be able to look under the water and see what the feet are doing. Right.
Yeah, I mean, another value, contracts is a great, everybody has a different one. Some of you are great financial analysts, some of you are great deal negotiators, some of you are great contract writers. You do have the benefit in Colorado of having, being able to do things that a lot of other your competitors can't do. Buyers think, oh, I've got the information. I can go on Zillow and I see it, boom, 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 boom. I got it. What do I need you for? Well, they may have the information, but they don't know what the hell to do with it. They don't understand pricing. They don't understand sales comps. You guys have been in every one of those other competing properties physically. You've shown them, you've toured them, you've sold them.
Inspections.
You've listed them. I mean, all of the stuff that you do that you underappreciate, and you do so damn much. And we haven't appreciated, we haven't respected ourselves as an industry enough. I really, really believe that, particularly on the buyer broker side. And because we haven't respected ourselves enough, we've allowed buyers to not respect what we do. But we need to start articulating what we do much, much better than we've ever done. Because those challenges are what are at the core of all of this stuff, is what are you doing for all this money you're making? Does anybody close 100% of the deals you work on? Of course not. That's not how our industry works. How many other businesses only get paid if you're successful? Think about that. Huh?
Car sales.
Car salesmen even typically have a salary. They got a
usually
base
have a
salary or
salary or
something.
base,
Who's got a base salary in here? No. Who the hell does that? You guys do. That's a value proposition. You can show a buyer, write 50 offers over 50 months and never be successful and burn $50,000 in gasoline these days showing them around. And burn 50 weekends away from your family and your friends and your hobbies and all the stuff you could be doing otherwise and get zero for it. If that's not a value proposition, I don't know what is, but we don't talk about that. It's true. You should be fired up because they're challenging everything that you guys do. But on some level, we deserve the challenge because we've gotten lazy about selling our value proposition. So seriously, spend some time on that website. It's also great updates on what's going on in the antitrust stuff, but I think it's one of the best resources for a great articulation of your value proposition that I've ever seen put together in one place. It's a great opportunity to be thinking about that stuff. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox.
No, you did great. That was, if you had pants, it'd been a lot better, but that's the side point. You don't know if it would have. Okay. What's next? DesignWorks. So DesignWorks is an interesting lawsuit. So what happened is Missouri, right? I always forget which state it's
I
in.
think it is Missouri.
I think it's
because
Missouri
we joke
too,
about
was
how there's a lawsuit. Yeah.
Yeah. So Missouri had DesignWorks is an architect. DesignWorks went and built an atrium, and it was apparently a very beautiful atrium. Did the atrium, finished the construction, seller moves in, or owner moves in, owns the property, decides to sell. Broker says, you know, his atrium's fantastic, but what we really need is we need some floor plans or something that shows how the atrium sits in here. And so they went ahead and they hired somebody to do, some third party to do floor plans. And then they advertised them on the MLS and said, hey, here's the floor plans, here's this atrium. DesignWorks says, you can't do that. That is our intellectual property because we designed the atrium. And so you're not allowed to use that without our permission. District court disagreed and said, no, come on, really? Do you guys think it makes sense? Court of Appeals overturned the district court and said that this is intellectual property. It's been certified to this, it's the Supremes, isn't it?
Yeah, the Supremes agreed to pick it up and they granted cert.
Granted cert. And so NAR has actually filed an amicus brief, which means they're talking about, hey, the fact that this doesn't make sense. But right now, I mean, that case law has the implications potentially of being that, wait a minute, that means that if you guys make floor plans, you could be violating somebody's intellectual property rights. So that's the implication of this. No, we're going to see what happens. So hopefully the Supremes get it right and overturn the appellate court. But right now, that's where things stand. So it's an interesting case just because it starts to bring in this intellectual property right issue as far as what you can and can't do with your advertising.
Should you? Should you? No, I don't think I would worry about it.
Yeah, and one of the things to remember about DesignWorks is it was a very unique atrium.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the one thing about this. It was very unique. I don't think the Court of Appeals got it right. I mean, the reality is this is something the seller had. They should be able to go get their own floor plans to advertise what they're selling. But it was just because of its uniqueness that they said, no, it's intellectual.
Well,
so,
yeah.
So you can see where they limit that too in the Supreme Court's decision. But
I want to clarify, Dana, that if you have floor plans, whether this goes to floor plans, it goes to photographs, it goes to any intellectual property. If you're using floor plans on a listing that aren't in this scenario, these floor plans were redrawn.
Yeah, they're redrawn.
They weren't the original floor plans. That's what's so mind-boggling about this. But there's no question that somebody owns an intellectual property right in floor plans that exist. It may be the seller, it may not, it may be the architect. But so I would be very cautious in this digital age, whether it's photographs, any images, and certainly drawings, floor plans, something that was created by some third party, and you're using that in your commercial marketing of a property, you create an opportunity to get hit by whoever that intellectual property owner is with an intellectual property violation.
Yeah, our listing contract actually has in it that anything we get from the seller, they are confirming and acknowledging that they have the intellectual property rights for us to put it up. However, that doesn't mean you shouldn't at least have the conversation with them to make sure that they actually do own those intellectual property rights before you put it up, because it could create a legal liability for them. Maybe not you, but at least for them.
And that's the thing, they often don't, or they don't even think about it. That's something they don't even pay attention to. Well, but that's okay. So Matterport's creating, that's based on its own drawing of being in the property. What I'm referring to is, let's say you got, 5 years ago, your seller who bought the home 5 years ago that was new construction from a builder, they have the floor plans. I wouldn't just take those floor plans and throw them on the MLS. I think I'd be very cautious about that because it could be the sellers that own them. You don't know. That's between the architect and maybe the builder and the seller, not between you and the seller. So you got to be cautious with that. Yeah. I think your MLS probably has disclaimers on, they don't have anything.
I mean, it's still being created for you. If the floor plan's being put up, it's still being created for you. So you have the intellectual property rights in that. What DesignWorks is scary about is the fact that they created this just like you guys do. And then they got hit by DesignWorks that says, no, it's unique. It's an intellectual property right, which is just, I don't know how they say that. It's weird that you could create, this third party could create something and they say, no, that's ours. But that's what's scary about it. So a lot of this depends on what happens at the Supreme Court as far as, what our advice is going to be, because we just don't know how they're going to rule. But hopefully they rule correctly in the fact that that's not a violation of intellectual property rights, which means you can continue to do it. For now, I don't know. Disclaimer, I don't know if that really helps you a ton.
Well, I think the
DesignWorks
listing
holds up.
agreement helps you the most if you're receiving something from your client. The thing I get it, this is a derivative or tangential but directly related issue is photographs. I hear a lot about listing brokers who are right-clicking, save as, and it's often something innocuous. Like one of them, the most recent example that I get is Central Park. It used to be Stapleton in Denver. And they have these big monument signs. And then they used to say Stapleton, and then they swapped them all out. Now they say Central Park. And so some listing broker had a listing in there, went to the Central Park HOA website, and they right-clicked, saved as an image on their desktop. And then they use that in their MLS photos. And then they get a letter. And it was odd. It wasn't Getty Images, it was another big image aggregator. But somebody owned that, and they get a letter saying, with a picture, a black and white image of that at the top of the letter, saying you've been using this photograph in your marketing efforts for the last 72 days for commercial purposes. Based on our calculations, your use of that, you need to send us a check for $2,782 or whatever. It was like $2,000 some dollars. And so I get a call in the hotline, and she goes like, "Is this spam? Are they phishing me? What am I getting messed with?" And I'm like, "No, that's real. Like that's a legitimate demand." And brokers do it all the time, but they have these software systems that just scan the interwebs for the. Anybody know what those digital codes are that are assigned to photographs?
The digital codes assigned to photographs.
Yeah, but they're called. There's an acronym for them. There's an acronym for the codes. Anyhow, it's very easy to pull up, and they don't. It's one thing if you're taking. I always use the example, like if you take a picture or take a YouTube video of your kids skiing and you lay in, Motley Crue in the background, put it up on YouTube. What you'll find is if you go back 6 weeks later, the video's there, the music's gone, right? And you never hear a word about it. That's personal use. So it's not really attractive for an intellectual property owner to come pursue you for that. But you do it in your listings, it's commercial use. And that's where you get the damage metrics that make sense for some of these image owners to send out these demand letters saying, hey, send us something. Most of them will agree to negotiate something down, but it's not something to just sort of blow off because they do have intellectual property rights in this thing. And that's for years I've been getting those calls, but I think that kind of is increasing as well because the software systems that track the use of intellectual property get better and better and better. So
I'll just say I had one that was a little worse than that. It's companies called Copycat Imaging. So you right there, you're like, oh, this is going to be fun. But it's a law firm out of Florida, and the artist, his images were registered at the Library of Congress, which means that he gets statutory damages if he brings the lawsuit of $100,000 if you use it in a commercial use. So they sent us a pocket listing, a pocket lawsuit, which essentially said, here's the lawsuit we're going to file against you, and you need to settle this. And they wanted $30,000. So this is a real issue, particularly if you get a artist that is really well. This guy photographed for National Geographic, had his stuff up in the Library of Congress. I mean, he was well known. And the more well known the artists are, the more the damages go up. And he wanted to make examples of people. So We're still negotiating that. Hopefully we're going to get it done, but it is a real problem.
Be cautious. Be afraid. Yeah. I don't want to be a bummer here. We're talking about antitrust into like, you know, intellectual
Well,
property.
there's nothing fun on here. Are you
That's-
kidding me?
Can't wait. You guys, we'll talk about short-term rentals if you, I mean,
They probably know more than
yeah,
we
you
do.
guys know more than we do. I know it's a problem and you guys aren't the only ones dealing with it. It's a lot of different places. I think we talked about this literally a year ago at the same event. And it was the day after, I think maybe it was Town of Breckenridge or maybe it was Summit County. It was one of the two made some pretty dramatic kind of scale backs, but I don't know. Are they seeing the impact of their ways yet? Not yet.
Or just you. They think it's good. Yeah.
Well, at least there's loads of affordable housing.
I'm sure that, yeah, I'm sure that that rent won't price people out at all.
Exactly say, hey, by the way, there's a cap on it, so I won't get a license. Not a cap or whatever. it
Yeah,
is,
yeah. The question is about now.
like somebody's closed and now they go to get their license. Is that something that's
So the
Yes.
question is about short-term rentals and whether the broker's advice on short-term rentals can come back, and absolutely it will. And I would stay away from giving them advice about what they can and cannot do in short-term rentals. Number one, it moves way too fast. Number two, you got to really know what it's doing. You know enough to tell them that, look, short-term rentals, you may or may not be in a district. You probably should go down to the town of Breckenridge and ask them if you're in a district and how long it would take to get a license. That's not your job to do all that stuff. That's like zoning. You don't give advice on zone. Oh, well, this is zoned I2, so you can put in medical marijuana. I mean, you don't do that. I mean, this is the same thing. You do need to give them good advice if that's what they want to do, to tell them where to go to get the information. But you don't have to be the source of and knowledge of everything that is short-term rentals. I would tell them if it's a concern, you need to go down and talk to somebody and make sure that you understand what you're getting into. Yeah, well, I always like in writing, Kurt, you know that this is me doing writing.
I had just on that real quickly on that point with regard to competency. I had a broker call me from Denver. This was probably 2 months ago, and they were asking because their former friend, it was a Denver broker, brought their buyer up here to Breckenridge. Their buyer had said something to them early on about, I want to find a little place in Breck that I can do some kind of an investment, a little VRBO, Airbnb thing. Denver broker has no idea about any of the short-term rental limitations. Buyer comes up here, closes, goes to get their rental permit, and they get laughed at basically, right? Like it's not happening. So now that neighbor friend of the broker is now coming back to the Denver broker, and they're saying the call to me was, should I be notifying my E&O provider?
Yes.
And that was my answer immediately. I said, don't ever, and that's a good point. And Damian, I know we'll reiterate this. Don't ever hesitate to notify your E&O provider, because I've been hearing more recently about E&O providers denying coverage because they weren't informed early enough. After brokers starts negotiating on their own behalf, when they have a potential problem, they don't notify their E&O provider, and they breach their coverage agreement with their provider.
That's a real, I will tell you, E&O insurance right now is, you're seeing underwriters go out and not want to cover anybody in Colorado all over the place. Hartford's out, One Beacon's out, Topa's out, QBE is out, casualties. I mean, it is unbelievable how many carriers are just dropping coverage left and right. Crest, if you guys have Crest, they've been very handpicking their people. Like, you have to go through the questionnaire and make sure that you meet the requirements. If you don't, they don't want to cover you. I mean, so we're going to see a shakeup in our E&O insurance. But one of the ways that they're trying to recover from all these losses that they've been sustaining for the last 3 years is to try and figure out how to deny claims. So make sure that you're notifying early if you have something that looks hairy.
Yeah, don't ever give that a second thought. If you have, I think it's generally the language is like, as soon as you become aware of the potential of a claim, which could be much earlier than most people perceive it. Did you have a question?
Yes, I can't because I Obligated to.
Yeah, wait a couple weeks on short-term rental maps, apparently. Oh,
And right after they, well, August 23rd, we're gonna be putting some new stuff out. Help to help with confidence.
if so the question is about the information. If the information is coming from the town of Breck and you can just say it's a feed from the town, then it's not you making that representation. It's a feed coming from somewhere else. But just make sure you know where that feed's coming from.
It sounds like your very forward-thinking board of directors has been contemplating this issue actively, and you will soon have a solution to the concerns that you may have. I don't want to wade into that quagmire. Are you kidding me? I have shorts on, but they're not high enough.
Well, we tried to make it generic enough that it about means whatever is working. So it's still. I mean, it doesn't say you're in the north line. But we also, like, as these things keep changing, you have no idea how long this is gonna last. But we keep trying to decide what makes most sense for realtors to be able to, A, educate your clients, B, as things change, right, like say you got a listing and 3 weeks later, now you're in something else, but it's not so tied down that you have to constantly be updating your listing because it does go out, right? So that doesn't, so there's a lot of stuff to it, but we're also, I think we are doing GIS too.
Damian, I'd just like to point out how quickly a room full of realtors can turn into an MLS form.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Click here, which town are you in, or which town, are you town or county, which town? Click there and read all, it goes straight to their rules. So I would send people to that, so this is their rules.
There he's good. Now he's got a little levity to him. Mr. Glass, empty. All right, I mean, you guys tell me, are you guys tired? You want to move along to lunch and everything? Oh, question, topic? Yeah, so you guys are familiar with this? Generally, it's a pretty important topic. I actually found out they've had a couple of additional claims.
Yeah, a lot of them have.
Yeah. So just to set up the background, or very quickly set up the background, it was probably 4 or 5 months ago was the first call I got. It was somebody it was a Crested Butte broker called and said, my broker had a buyer, and the buyers found on Zillow this vacant land available that wasn't listed on the MLS. It was a FSBO listing on Zillow, vacant land. And so the buyer goes, hey, can you help me with this property? And the broker goes, let me check, reaches out to the property owner out of state, says, sure, absolutely. Happy to work with you. Happy to pay a commission, blah, 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 blah. And so she takes her buyer, goes through the transaction with this out-of-state broker and close on the transaction. And then she gets a call, the same broker gets a call a few days, like literally two days later, the buyer broker gets a call from a neighbor of this vacant land seller that she just closed with her buyer with. And the neighbor says, hey, I heard you did a great job. I hear you're a very active broker in town. I'd like for you to list my house. She puts the listing on the market, puts her sign in the yard, puts it under contract. He has somebody else call in the meantime. And while this other property is still under contract, say, hey, I'd like you to list my property, another vacant piece of land. And meanwhile, the actual owner of her listing that has her sign in the yard happens to drive by, sees her sign here going, what the hell's going on here? So this was a fraud being perpetuated by some out-of-state, group, and they were doing it everywhere. I mean, they came in, they just hit every market. It happened in Pueblo. Did one happen up here? I think Sarah was maybe telling me you guys had one that was listed up here. So the first one, remember, closed, fake seller, fraudulently closed.
Money paid.
Second one under contract, they found out in time to terminate that contract, obviously. And the third one never got listed, or she never actually finalized the listing agreement with this person. crazy question, but I'll let Damian explain.
Yeah.
Wait, Damian, when I got that call, I about fell out of my chair. I'm like, how could that happen? That was my response. And I started thinking about it. Vacant land,
Vacant land,
no debt.
cash, yeah, that it's owned outright. And it's an absentee seller. And so it looks like it's just a mail out going out to some seller in New York who wants to sell a property. We can tell you what the title companies are doing now to try and shut this down. But I mean, it was actually brilliant.
Yeah, it's the easiest scam in the world. So this fraudster goes and they look in public records, they find properties that are land. So you don't have to deal with inspections. You don't have to deal with access to the property, any of that stuff. It's vacant. And so they find the property records. They find hopefully one owner, a single person. So they only have to replicate like one notary signature, one fake ID, theoretically, any of those things, and no debt on it. So they don't have to get loan payoffs. They don't have to go, there's nothing in the bank. So it's owned outright, vacant piece of land. And hopefully in most cases, it was just one individual that owned it, seller. And so this out-of-state person then would facilitate this mail-out closing. Oh, I'm in New York, I can't get my property closed. So what I don't think anybody still knows is, were they using a fraudulent notary, or were they taking a fraudulent ID to a normal notary who just wasn't being able to see this stuff, or didn't notice the difference? I like to tell this story if I can.
Yeah, I think it's a fake ID because they had to be able to deposit the money into an account. But tell your story.
Well, I have 3 children. One of them is 21, legit. One of them is 19, but she's 21 in the state of Washington. One of them, and this is the part that I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell, he's almost 18, but he's 21 in the state of Texas. He's like 6'4". He's a big kid, Anyhow, so I look at these IDs and you can't tell the bloody difference. And I know this because my niece, who's in California, has a Colorado fake ID. And the last Thanksgiving, I'm like looking at mine next to hers, right down to the hologram on there. For $80 in the dark webs from China, you get 2 of these fake IDs that are absolutely perfect. And they even scan the back, like they can scan them if they go to a bar and the bar has, so they're perfect. So how easy is it for somebody to go, okay, I see, Robert Smith owns this vacant piece of land that's unencumbered in Crested Butte or Breckenridge or wherever, have a fake ID printed up from New York for Robert, A. Smith, under the exact same name. Now you can take that to a notary if you need to open a bank account. A bank account's not really looking for fake ID. It's bars that look for fake ID, right? So they got the bank account they open up, and they only need the bank account for a day. When the funding hits, move the money out, and they're gone.
Maybe marijuana shops too.
Marijuana shops look too, yeah. But you see how this can happen. So the point is this: what happened was after that first phone call, I think you started hearing about it. I started hearing about it like all over the place in all these communities. Land Title Association of Colorado, LTAC, which is they're the association for all the title companies. That's not Land Title. It's their association for all of the title companies. They got very actively involved. CAR got very actively involved, and DRE got very actively involved. A lot of messaging, trying to basically shut this down. And that's the best way to shut down these frauds is information. And then you can tell them what the title company's doing.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing the title companies are doing is, because they have the records of where the tax bills are sent, they won't do a mail out, but if they have to do a mail out, they'll send a letter to make sure that somebody responds to them is one thing they're doing. They prefer not to do mail outs at all. They want people to come in and do the signing on those documents. But obviously they flag anything that is vacant land, and it makes sense, right? Vacant land, because if it's a house and people have to go into it, it's probably got somebody that's watching and knowing what's going on. And anything that's a cash or doesn't have a loan against it. Because the lenders are a good protection, because if you got to get a payoff, they're going to make sure that they're getting the right payoff from the right person. But the implications of this are huge. Like, think about the one that closed. What if those buyers hadn't found out about this for 2 years and they built a house? Okay, the title policy that they have is good for the price of the lot, right? So if they spent $300,000 on a lot and then spent another $1 million building a house, they get the 300,000. That's it. Everybody see how that? I mean, it's yeah. And then the owner's like, well, maybe they might be like, I don't like that house.
Who would ever build that? I'll close on this with this. I've had a couple of calls on the hotline from brokers who represented buyers. So these deals closed. And so title now is on the hook. So title is cutting checks for 300, 400, whatever the purchase price was on the property. And then they're sending a letter to the broker who represented the buyer saying, we need that commission back. So I've had a couple of calls from buyer brokers who said, I've got this letter from, XYZ title company wanting their commission back. Do I have to give it back? I don't have an answer.
I don't either.
I mean, I say,
how do you not?
Yeah, like it seems like kind of the right thing to do,
Yeah.
but we don't have like precedent for this. Like this is new. So I'm like, I can't tell you you do, but you might want to. How many title companies are in town? Because you're never going to work with that one again, probably. Right. And so anyhow, that's another bit of the funny fallout. So there was a bunch of these closings that occurred. And all right, we're at 1 o'clock. I think you guys are done, and I think we're done, and I think you're done with us, and you're ready for your lunch. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Do a powwow? We're supposed to do a powwow.
A powwow?
I don't know. I guess.
Come over here so she's got an angle. She can see my toes. Oh, wait, hold on. I didn't show you. I need to click forward.
Click forward.
The most important slide. We can't.
No pressure, Trish. No pressure.
And I'm sorry.
You're sorry because I'm the one that gets to be embarrassed by this.
They're red. One more. There he is. He did it with his kid. He did it with his kid. So that kind of makes it okay. And one more.
Oh, God.
I didn't film this one either.
Yeah. This
We
is
don't-
me on a snowboard.
We don't have audio, but in the background, what's playing is Girls Just Want to Have Fun by Cyndi Lauper. That's a true story.
Okay,
Thank you, guys.
Go eat lunch and stop making fun of me. No.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, let me turn it off.
No, you did fine. Let's just close everything out and shut it down.